A manager humiliates a janitor in front of everyone, firing her in the most degrading way. But what she does next changes everything, and he'll regret it more than he ever imagined. Before we jump in, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story too. Today, I'll take you through a story that reveals how one brave janitor turned an awful moment into a life-changing win when a manager's blatant disrespect crossed the line. She doesn't back down. She makes a stand, and what unfolds is something you'll want to see all the way to the end. Claire, in her early 50s, had been with the company for nearly a decade, quietly working in the background, unnoticed yet indispensable. Her days began before the sun rose, sweeping through empty hallways, polishing desks, and making sure every surface shone. Raised in a small town with a strong sense of pride and resilience, Claire knew what it meant to work hard. She carried herself with a quiet dignity, treating every task, no matter how small, with the respect it deserved. To those who bothered to notice, she was a comforting presence, someone who always had a warm smile and a friendly word, even in passing. While most employees saw Claire as part of the building itself, there were a few who acknowledged her presence, appreciating the role she played in keeping their workspace clean and comfortable. They respected her, even if their encounters were brief. Yet in this company, respect and kindness were rare commodities, especially from those at the top. Mark, in his mid-30s, embodied the corporate mentality in its most unfeeling form. He'd risen through the ranks, coming from a family that valued status above all else. For Mark, titles and power were what mattered, and he was unapologetic about using his position to reinforce his authority. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and always carried himself with an air of superiority that made it clear he saw himself as above the rest, especially those who worked behind the scenes. To him, the janitorial staff and most of the lower employees were invisible. They existed to serve, nothing more. When he did acknowledge them, it was only to throw a condescending glance or make a cutting remark, as if to remind them and himself that they were beneath him. Mark had little patience for anything he deemed less than perfection, and even less for those he considered disposable. The building reflected this cold, hierarchical atmosphere. Employees moved briskly from one task to the next, keeping interactions to a minimum, each one sensing the unspoken divide that Mark helped solidify. To them, the janitorial team blended into the background, their contributions overlooked. There was a line drawn between the corporate staff and the janitors, a divide that everyone, consciously or not, seemed to honor. But beneath her quiet demeanor, Claire carried a strength that went unnoticed, a spirit that had seen her through life's challenges. She dealt with tough situations before, both in and out of work, yet had always chosen to respond with grace. Her resilience was her armor, though few could see it. And while Mark's dismissive attitude and the building's cold formality created an unwelcoming environment, she remained focused on her work, determined to do her job with dignity. Today, however, was different. The tension simmered in the air as Claire went about her tasks, sensing a growing unease. The subtle shift in the way employees moved through the halls. Unbeknownst to her, this would be the day when that line, the one that kept people like Claire in the shadows, would be tested. Mark, with his usual impatience and disregard, would finally go too far, and Claire would be faced with a decision that would set everything in motion. A choice that would bring this silent conflict to a boiling point and change the dynamic within those walls forever. It was a day like any other, the same rhythm of early mornings and quiet dedication for Claire. She was going about her duties, meticulous as always, when an incident arose. A minor mistake, something so trivial that most wouldn't even give it a second thought. But Mark, the manager, seized the moment. He didn't hesitate or pull her aside. Instead, he decided to make a spectacle of it in front of her coworkers. Mark unleashed a stream of accusations, his voice cold and unyielding. He blamed Claire for problems that had nothing to do with her, refusing to listen, intent on making her the scapegoat. His tone sharpened, laced with racially charged comments that hung heavy in the air, striking a blow not just to her professionalism but to her dignity. And with a final dismissive sneer, he looked at her and said, "You're fired." Claire stood there, feeling the weight of every eye on her, each gaze a mixture of shock, discomfort, and perhaps even shame. But despite the humiliation, she held her head high. She knew this wasn't right, that no one should be treated this way, especially not for something so undeserved and rooted in prejudice. After a moment to collect herself, Claire made a decision. She wasn't going to let this slide. She took her story to human resources, calmly recounting every word, every insult, and the way it was all thrown at her in a public space. But she didn't stop there. Claire also reached out to a lawyer who specialized in workplace discrimination. She shared every detail of her experience, knowing now that this was bigger than just her own pride. It was about setting a precedent, making sure that no one else had to endure what she did. Word of the incident began to ripple through the office. People whispered in break rooms and hallways, snippets of conversations carrying hints of admiration and respect for Claire's courage. Some of her coworkers, those who'd seen her kindness and dedication over the years, felt compelled to speak up, sharing memories of her quiet resilience and the way she'd always gone above and beyond in her job. Others, though, admitted something darker. They'd heard Mark's sharp, insensitive remarks before, aimed at Claire and others like her, but had kept silent out of fear or apathy. They spoke of his history of treating the janitorial team and anyone he saw as beneath him with open disdain. Each story, each quiet revelation painted a picture of a pattern that many had seen but never confronted. The office that once ran on silence and routine now buzzed with a new energy, a shared sense that this time, someone was standing up, refusing to be invisible. And Claire, despite the humiliation she'd endured, found herself at the center of a quiet uprising, a ripple effect that would soon challenge everything about the way people looked at each other within those walls. Claire's courage sparked something much larger than she ever anticipated. Her decision to stand up and speak out had captured the attention of those around her, echoing through the very walls that had once felt indifferent. Her complaint didn't get buried in the usual paperwork shuffle. Instead, HR took it seriously, setting in motion a formal investigation. It was as if Claire's words had breathed new life into the office, bringing to light things that had long been pushed into the shadows. As HR dug deeper, layers of truth began to unravel. Witnesses were called in, many of whom had stories of their own about Mark's behavior. Some reluctantly shared memories of snide remarks. Others spoke of moments where he had wielded his authority in petty, demeaning ways, especially towards the janitorial team. Slowly, the pattern emerged. A history of bias and prejudice that Mark had managed to hide behind his title and position. Each testimony painted a clearer picture, making it impossible for anyone to ignore the reality of his actions. Mark, feeling the pressure building around him, grew visibly unsettled. The confidence he once flaunted began to crack. He'd been a fixture in that office for years, someone whose authority had rarely been questioned. But now he found himself on unfamiliar ground, forced to confront his own actions. As the walls closed in, HR insisted on a public apology, an unprecedented move that sent a clear message. His behavior wouldn't be swept under the rug this time. In front of the very people who had once witnessed his arrogance and cruelty, Mark was made to apologize to Claire. His words, forced and lacking in sincerity, fell flat in the silent room, and everyone watching could see the discomfort in his eyes. But the apology was just the beginning. As he fumbled through his hollow words, trying to save face, a decision was made. One that would turn everything on its head. The higher-ups, no longer willing to let this incident stain their company's reputation, took swift and decisive action. Right there in the same office where he'd once humiliated Claire, Mark was informed that he would be terminated. The shock was evident in his face as the gravity of the situation hit him. He'd gone from a man who wielded power freely to someone stripped of his title, told to clear out his desk under the watchful eyes of those he'd once looked down upon. The tables had turned in a way that felt almost poetic. Where once he had stood proud and untouchable, he now walked away humbled and exposed. The very people he belittled watched him as he left. A moment that no one in that office would soon forget. For Claire, the change in the air was tangible. That same day, colleagues approached her, many for the first time, truly seeing her as a person rather than just a background figure. They offered words of support and admiration, expressing gratitude for her bravery. People who had never once acknowledged her presence now looked at her with respect, recognizing the strength it took to do what she had done. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was seen, valued, respected. Claire stood a little taller that day, her quiet dignity shining brighter than ever. It was as if she'd been cloaked in a new kind of strength, one that came not only from standing up for herself but from the realization that she'd helped open people's eyes. The office, which had once felt cold and divided, now felt different, as if something had shifted in the foundation itself. People spoke to each other a little more. Small gestures of kindness flickered in the corners where before there had been only indifference. Claire finally felt seen for who she really was, strong, courageous, and deserving of every ounce of respect she had long earned but never received. Her story would linger in the memories of everyone there. A reminder that true strength often lies in quiet resilience, and that sometimes one act of courage is all it takes to change everything. After the dust settled, the company took a bold step to make things right with Claire. Recognizing the gravity of what she had endured, they reached out to her with a formal offer to reinstate her position. But this time, it wasn't just about getting her job back. Along with the offer came a heartfelt apology from the company's leadership, acknowledging the injustice she had faced and expressing regret for the hardship caused. They knew mere words wouldn't be enough to compensate for the public humiliation and distress she had endured. So they went a step further, offering her a generous compensation package as a gesture of goodwill. Claire accepted the offer, but this time she returned with a renewed sense of self-worth and confidence. Gone was the quiet, invisible figure that had once walked the halls unnoticed. Now, Claire held her head high, moving through the office with a strength and pride that everyone around her could see. She wasn't just the janitor anymore. She was the woman who had stood up to injustice and changed the dynamic within those walls. Her presence carried weight now. People greeted her with a nod of respect, recognizing her not just for her work but for her courage. Her coworkers looked at her differently. There was a new light in their eyes when they spoke to her, a recognition that she was more than they had allowed them to see. They saw her not just as the person who cleaned up after them, but as a force for change, someone who had shown them the true value of resilience and dignity. Small gestures of respect appeared where before there had been indifference. A friendly greeting in the morning, a quick thank you at the end of the day. In subtle ways, they were showing their gratitude, acknowledging her as an equal, a fighter who had risked everything to stand up for what was right. In a way, the office itself seemed to change as well. The once cold, indifferent space now held a sense of camaraderie and mutual respect. Conversations between employees felt warmer, and the invisible divide between corporate staff and the janitorial team began to fade. People were reminded that every role in that building, from the highest office to the smallest janitorial closet, held value. Claire's stand had not only restored her own dignity but had also sparked a shift in the company's culture. Her story didn't just inspire those who worked with her. It served as a reminder to everyone that no one should ever tolerate discrimination or disrespect, no matter how daunting the odds may seem. Sometimes, all it takes is one person's courage to bring about change. Claire's journey showed them that everyone, no matter their position or title, deserves to be treated with respect and dignity. It was a powerful reminder that often justice can take root in the most unexpected places, sparked by the quiet resilience of those who refuse to be silenced. Reflecting on Claire's story, it's clear that even in the hardest of times, standing up for yourself can lead to something better. Her experience demonstrated the strength that lies within all of us, to rise above mistreatment, to demand fairness, and to refuse to accept anything less than respect. Through her resilience, she showed us that while justice isn't always immediate, it can eventually come around. And when it does, it has the power to transform not only individuals but entire communities. Claire's journey from invisible to unstoppable serves as a testament to the power of courage. Her story reminds us that even the smallest act of defiance in the face of injustice can lead to profound change, opening people's eyes to what has been wrong all along. And in that newfound understanding, we are reminded of a simple truth. Every job, every person deserves dignity. The quiet acts of resilience can echo louder than any title or rank, leaving an impact that resonates long after the initial battle has been fought and won. If you were in Claire's shoes, what would you have done?